Okay, so today, remember, we're talking about which cluster? Anglo. And the word Anglo comes from the word England, which refers to English. All right, Anglo. And what word used to be attached to Anglo as part of the descriptor?
Saxony.
Right. I did a little snooping around. Saxony, you've probably all heard of Saxony. It's in northern Germany. It's when the Saxons first were settling in that region, they were settling at the south end of the Baltic Sea, which is right up there north of Germany. And so that's how that all happened. They mixed with the English. And so the German language, ended up having a great influence on the English language and so on. So that's kind of how that all got mixed up. So let's look at some of these. What we're going to do for each of these clusters at the conclusion of the section is ask the question, what cultural dimensions or values that we studied in the first half of the semester seem especially interesting? We can't go through all 10 of them for each cluster. We wouldn't have time. But risk. So what would you think? In the Anglo cluster, would risk be more, high uncertainty avoidance or low uncertainty avoidance? Anglo cluster. High or low? Low uncertainty avoidance. Everybody agree with that or some disagree? Yeah, that is correct. I mean, just look at the nature of the Anglo cluster over the years. The very idea of colonialism required a whole lot of venturing out, and trying to stake claims in other countries, other continents. All that is risky business, okay? The westward advance of our country and of other countries. Remember that this cluster is characterized by a lot of land and usually seas on both sides. So there's a lot of room for expansion, and so risk has been a big factor. So number one, on an uncertainty avoidance scale of 1 to 30, the Anglo cluster scores 30. So it's not extreme, but it's definitely down on the side of higher risk. Remember, this is an uncertainty avoidance scale. So the higher the number, the more you avoid it. This is only a 30 out of 100, so it's higher risk. Okay. Number two, it's the only cluster that desires less avoidance than it already has. I'm not sure exactly how to explain this, except that it seems like in the Anglo cluster, there's almost a mania for trying the difficult, okay? Of reaching out. We see that completely out of control right now in our country with the moral revolution going on, pulling all the stops, and people wanting to even, do surgeries and things to change their gender. Things like that, and that's just a very small example, but things like that typify an attitude of high risk. And it seems to be, I don't know if I asked you guys when we studied this, are any of you into, okay, what do you call the sports that are high risk? Yeah, extreme sports. Anybody ever been involved in that? For me, downhill skiing on a bunny hill is extreme sport. Individualism. So, obviously, very much characteristic. Rights, freedom, responsibility. Now, of those three, which one is especially lacking in our culture right now? Yeah, the third one. Everybody is crying out, I have a right to be who I am. You can't tell me, who I am or what to do. But where is the responsibility in that? Actually what's happening in our culture is that the public school system is usurping the authority in some places that belongs naturally to the parents. It has been a hallmark of the Anglo cluster, and more than just the Anglo cluster, but especially here, of parental responsibility in training children. And so now, you see the public schools in some places, trying to dismiss the parents as authorities and allowing the professionals to decide, how to help their children. Okay, rights, freedom, responsibility. personal space, and we've talked about that, right? Personal space, okay. What about competition? High or low competition when it comes to the Anglo? Yeah, very definitely high. Tit for tat, however, one of the things that Anglos like to boast of or like to consider themselves to be is, I'm sorry, I thought this was on here. I beg your pardon, let me get this going here. Anglos like to consider themselves, fair and balanced, to use one news network's claim. Tit for tat. They like to create win-win situations. Anglos in the past have wanted people. Look at the world wars. The United States, typically in world wars, has not. Okay, nobody's perfect, but when you look at the results of world wars, the United States has a reputation, at least in major wars, of wanting to help even the losers to rebuild and to do well, because they recognize that it's the regimes within those countries and not the common people. And so this idea of win-win relationships, of helping people to do well, has been a characteristic, at least in general. And also this one. Let me ask you this. If somebody invites you over for dinner, do you find yourself feeling obligated to return the favor? Maybe it depends somewhat on who it is. And if it's somebody that's, wealthy, that does something you could never repay, but in general, we who are Anglos tend to feel that way. It kind of goes along with the tit for tat idea, win-win relationships. When somebody leaves, or when I leave somebody's house after they've invited me over, on the way out of the door, I say what to them? They just invited us for dinner. We enjoyed a nice dinner. My wife and I are leaving, and on the way out of the door, we say, "We'll have to have you over." Exactly. We'll have to have you guys over sometime. Yeah. There's just that. Part of that is what? What motivates that? Pride. Anglos do not like to be outdone. So we're okay with the tit for tat as long as we get, our part is fair. We don't like to be outdone. And so our pride is sometimes hurt if we feel like somebody's doing something for us. And by the way, Christians, it's really easy for us as Christians to feel that way, especially when unbelievers do favors for us. We're tempted to feel like, wait a minute, this is backwards. I'm the Christian. I'm supposed to be the one that's showing the love of Christ to them. They're not even Christians, and they're doing a favor for me. And I think it's faulty thinking on our part, because everybody's made in the image of God, right? So people who are not saved can do really kind favors for people. If I see an unsaved neighbor helping another neighbor shovel their driveway, I'm thinking, oh man, my wife and I are trying to establish a testimony in our neighborhood, and here he's out. He shouldn't be doing that. I should be doing that. There's some faulty thinking going on there. But that's a characteristic of the Anglo culture. Doing, are we more doing than being? Absolutely. Actions speak louder than words. The British Empire did not begin as one unifying vision. This reflects one of the nuances of the Anglos. They are unusually open societies. Let me just, I'm going to say a couple things to kind of add on to that. John Darwin, no relation to Charles, he was a British educator, historian. He said the hallmark of British imperialism was its extraordinary versatility in method, outlook, and objective. And to complete that idea, number 4, the British got the local indigenous people to collaborate in their own colonialization. The British were smart that way. When they went into India or African nations or other places in Latin America or whatever, their idea was we're gonna involve the people so that they actually feel like they're the ones that are doing the work. Okay, and I mean it was a brilliant idea. And so that idea of versatility, involving the people, and that's not just British, by the way. Even the Romans, remember when they conquered the world, they would allow nations to have a certain amount of freedom. Remember, they allowed the Jews to maintain their temple worship and to have their Sanhedrin to govern the people. Part of that was pragmatic. They didn't want to have to micromanage all the nations they were conquering, so they would allow these. And you can go back even farther than the British. Go back to the Persian Empire. Okay, when Cyrus released the Jews from captivity in Babylon and let them go back, he did that not just for the Jews but other nations that he had conquered as well. And the idea there was to get the Jewish people to feel like they were autonomous to some degree. Okay, just a second. I just know this camera apparently was moved last week. Let me just shift that a little bit back to where. Oops, wrong way. Get it back. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so anyway, so that generates this idea of diversity and variety in the culture. Alrighty. Okay, the Anglo culture is a very short-term time orientation. Can somebody remind us as to why that is? What is that short-term mindset linked to? Why does the Anglo cluster seem to be so short-term? Jules?
Is it because we have like a set schedule and we're like, we have to stay to this schedule, and if we don't stay to this schedule, then something's going to go wrong.
Okay, yeah, it is tied to some degree to our orientation of time. All right, yeah, we want to stick to what we plan. Good. There's another reason too, especially when it comes to the United States. What is it about us that, yeah?
We're a really young culture.
Okay, we're a very young culture. Emma?
Like, we're not very old.
Right, exactly. And that, so because we're young, we don't rely as much on tradition and on the past, on precedents as we do on innovation. And that causes us to be short-term in our time orientation. It's kind of like you have a mom and dad have been around for a while and you got a teenager that just doesn't want to wait. And mom and dad keep saying, hey, look, just wait, don't be in a hurry. But it's hard sometimes for an adolescent or a teen to quick wins are very important. By the way, that's the way that, at least I'm not an expert on March Madness, and I know everybody's brackets are just totally destroyed after the first round. Happens every year. I had Arizona going all the way. They were a 2 seed. I watched the Purdue game. Anybody else see that game? And I don't know if you remember what they said, but the coach's strategy in the second half was everything was in 4-minute bites. His whole strategy for the second half was 4-minute segments. Here's what we're going to do during these 4 minutes, these four. Quick wins in order to do the job. It was pretty cool. All right. And then 2, performance seeks for immediate results. Okay. It's the same idea. Quick wins, immediate results kind of go together. What happens when a culture like this doesn't see this happening? Quick wins and immediate results. What happens? Yeah.
We tend to move on and think it was a failure.
Okay. We move on, but we also tend to change plans, right? It's easy in the Anglo culture not to give your plans very much time. If something isn't working out quickly, then it's flawed, and so we have to change. Whereas older companies can more easily put up with seeming failures because they know that in the long run it's going to work out. See? All right. Most Anglo cultures score similarly in the 10 dimensions. But there are a couple of exceptions to this rule. Now, we didn't even mention South Africa, did we, in this? We said U.S. and Canada, and Great Britain and Australia, New Zealand, right? But a lot of people will put at the very tip of Africa down there in South Africa, an indication of Anglo culture, and that's because of the white dominance in Africa. And what big event took place that started changing all that? What do we call that? Apartheid, or yeah, right? And which is a word that means. Anybody know what apartheid means? The word separation. Okay, and so if there is a hint of Anglo culture in South Africa, it's not native to the culture. It was, but I guess it wouldn't be in a lot of places because of the colonization of our country. But white South Africa has a wider power distance orientation because of the unique nature of apartheid and what went on there. New Zealand has more government involvement in the day-to-day life of its people. Anglo cultures tend to be more freedom-oriented, right? A little more democratic. And yet New Zealand is not so much that way. It's more socialistic. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but there is more government involvement in the day-to-day life of its people. And this may be in part due to its size and isolation. It's an island nation, so there are other factors that may play into that. Americans don't stay long in China, but neither do they stay in the UK because of significant differences that are often unnoticed. I've often asked my students, which would be a harder culture for you to adjust to if you're a Western American? Going to China or going to the UK? And knee-jerk reactions probably be easier to go to the UK. That's where our roots are, right? They speak English. And yet what happens? Why is that sometimes not the case? If it's a more similar culture, then why is it sometimes just as hard to adapt there as it is to a completely different culture? Paul?
Terminology.
Okay, yeah, even though the language is the same, man, there are a lot of words and phrases and, connotations that are very different. Okay, what else? Jules?
Is it still because their culture is different as well? Like, it's a little bit similar to yours, and you think that you should fit in, but then you go there and they still have, like, different ways of doing things?
Okay, yeah, there's a similarity that may draw you in and make you think, oh, they're like us. All of a sudden, you're surprised by something that's not, and you're not prepared for it. Emma?
It's like the expectation if you are going to a completely different culture, you expect there to be things that are different, and so you're kind of more prepared for that.
Yeah.
But when you're going somewhere like that's similar but just slightly different, then you assume that you're going to automatically adjust a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah, so what happens is we don't prepare as well going to a place that we think is similar, right? If you're going to go to a place like China, you're thinking, okay, I got to make sure I'm ready for this, and you're working really hard. Paul?
I was going to say the freedom is different, because in America, you have pretty much to do anything you want. But in UK, I think you're allowed to own something like a gun. So you feel like you are being pulled back to express yourself.
Okay, yeah, and because it's a similar culture, you wouldn't be surprised at that going to a place like China. You expect that, but you're not necessarily prepared for that going to the UK because of the similarity in culture. So something like that just hits you in a way that it wouldn't in a very different culture. Good. Did I see another hand there? Okay, yeah. So be careful. If you're going to a place that speaks English, that is Western or whatever, be careful that you don't just assume, that there are going to be differences. Be prepared for the difference. Okay, this is just a fun little quiz we're going to do, okay? It's kind of senseless in a way, but it just stimulates some thought. So here's a little quiz for you. How close is the nearest Walmart to your home? Well, let's just answer. How many of you have to drive more than 15 minutes from where you live to get to a Walmart? You do? How far? 30 minutes. 20 minutes. Anybody go more farther? Yeah.
Airplane ticket.
Airplane ticket. That makes it hardly worth going, doesn't it? Okay, I'm going to come back to that and give you some. Do you believe that you're living in the American dream? Now, some of you don't, Paul, you probably don't ask. I don't know if you even asked that question, coming from Congo. How many of you would say that, I know you have to ask, what is the American dream? right? The American dream, the definition of it changes all the time. I mean, what did Henry Ford say? He longed for the day when there would be a car in every family. Well, now the American dream is every teenager and mom and dad have to have their own car, right? Otherwise, you're not living the dream. If there's one car for the whole family, that's not the American dream. That's poverty. So a lot of, depends on when you're living. Bill Gates, what was his dream? That every household would have a personal computer. You guys got them in your pockets. So defining the American dream is a bit of a moving target. Are you tolerant of all races? Now, I'm copying this. I don't like the word races because we're talking ethnicities. As you know, there's one race. But look, I would just encourage you, if people use the word race, don't jump on them. Oh, there's only one race, the human race. Words have broad connotations at times, okay? I don't jump all over Luke when he calls Barnabas an apostle in the book of Acts, right? He's using the word more broadly. All right. Are you tolerant? Whoa, yeah. Can you name the Three Stooges? Can somebody give me the names? There's actually 4 of them because one of them, there's different. Do you remember? Why this question about the Three Stooges? Because when I was growing up, it was one of the most, in the 1950s and 60s, Three Stooges was one of the most popular, comedies. Everybody watched it. It was on almost every day. Nobody knows the names of the Three Stooges?
I feel like I might know, but I can't say it up.
Larry, Curly, Moe, and then Shemp came later on. Yeah. I mean, if you like absolutely ridiculous humor, just that slapstick, senseless, exaggerated humor, watch Three Stooges. There's a movie, Three Stooges movie out there. You're not into that, huh? It's stupid. Yeah, I mean, okay, but then you got Abbott and Costello, stupid. Creatively stupid. And you got Laurel and Hardy, stupid, But is that an Anglo thing? I don't know. Can you name the 3 branches of the U.S. federal government? Man, I hope you guys can. Yeah.
Executive, judicial, and legislature.
Good. All right. Yeah. But wait till I come back and give you the answer that's out there. Do you prefer smooth or chunky peanut butter? Both. You can't answer both. Smooth. I like smooth for a couple reasons. It's easier to spread, and you don't use up as fast. Did you ever notice if you buy chunky peanut butter, it doesn't take nearly as long to use it up? So here's the answer. Oh, there's another one. Do you live in the state where you were born? Now, I'm not talking about here at college, but when you go home, are you going home to the state where you were born? How many of you don't? Okay, you were born in?
I was born in China.
You were born in China. You came when you were how old?
14 months.
14 months. Wow, cool. And you were, sorry.
Born in Indiana.
Okay.
So they're basically the same.
Ooh. Did the Hoosiers win last night?
No.
They lost. And you heard Noah celebrating Kansas getting beat. Oh, are you Kansas State or Kansas?
Kansas.
That's why you weren't feeling well. Okay. All right. Anybody else not? I was born in Ohio. So here's the answers. The average in this is just a bunch of people in the United States that were asked this question, okay, Anglos. The average is within 20 minutes. So one of you is right on the board. Whoever said 20 minutes away was, yeah. Here, do you believe you're living the American dream? Most people say yes, they think they are, which is actually a good thing. If most Americans said no, are you tolerant? Americans love to boast in their tolerance. Okay, everybody has a bit of ethnocentrism. It's just it's built into the human, it's just part of human nature. But Americans, Anglos like to boast in being tolerant. Can you name the Three Stooges? Most can. Okay. Can you name the 3 branches? We did that. Most cannot. Ella, you are in the minority, and the rest of you too would be in the minority. Most 83% like smooth peanut butter. And 60%. I was a little bit surprised. I thought that more Americans would say because we're such a mobile country. Remember, because we're an individualistic country, when it's very common for kids to grow up, say bye mom and dad, and move on, and mom and dad say goodbye, God bless, and off they go. But 60% are still living where they were born. So that's just kind of a fun quiz type of thing you could do. You could think of other questions that you might ask. Do you like, what's your favorite fast food restaurant, or do you prefer fast food or sit down? Okay. In reality, there's no such thing as an average American. It's an idea that is countercultural. Now, that's not just true in America. When I went to Brazil, my wife reminded me that there really is no such thing as an average Brazilian. Northeast Brazil is very African. That's where we served. South Brazil is very European and quite a bit of Asian influence. And the Amazon is very much indigenous. And so, what's an average in any country? Some countries are easier to identify that way. Okay. The USA most resembles Anglos in the individualist dimension, and all the values that we studied first half of the semester, individualism is the one that most characterizes the Anglo culture. All right, some do's and don'ts, or do's and taboos. Do be on time. And you guys, I'll tell you that one. If Anglos are late, it's not because it's built into it's usually because they're not morning people, or they, for instance, Jeff Davis told me that his ETA was 9:15 last night to arrive here. So I went over that, and he texted me, he said, hey, there's an accident on 80 right around Altoona, so they rerouted me, I'm gonna be a little bit late. He's about 10 minutes late, if that. Well, in a lot of cultures, you wouldn't even think of calling somebody if you're going to be, 10, 15, 20 minutes late or whatever, But in our culture, if you say 9:15, then do allow for plenty of personal space, okay? And don't ask people how much money they make. A lot of people feel like that's an intrusion into their personal lives. It kind of goes along with people like their personal space physically, but they also like their personal space socially. That makes sense? You don't get too close to me physically. You don't get too close to, my income and what I own. So what kind of car do you drive? I've made that mistake before. I see a nice car, I say, ooh, that's a nice car. So what do you do for a living? Don't do that, okay? People don't like that. Bothers them. And it would bother me too. Yeah. They look at my car and say, do you have a job? D, don't feel the need to give gifts when meeting a new acquaintance. Then we just talked about that, right? That's not really part of our culture. See, in our culture, if you're invited over for dinner, you don't take a gift. Maybe you do, but that's not a typical part of our culture. The return comes later. Hey, we'll have to have you guys over sometime. We invited our Vietnamese neighbors to come over. Now, they've been living in the States for a long time. In fact, she was born in Florida, but they're both Vietnamese. And we invited them over for dinner, and they came over and they brought a dessert or something. I can't remember, but it was something, to go. That's their culture. So they do the same thing we do, but they do it up front. You bring a gift when you come. Because, in fact, we had a Brazilian family over. They did the same thing. They came over and they brought something with them. So they do it on the front end. We tend to do it on the back end. We'll have to have you over sometime. Interesting. Okay, this is where we're supposed to start today. So we're just a tiny bit behind. That's okay. We'll catch up. Any questions or comments about the Anglo culture that you want to make? It's pretty straightforward. It's the one that we understand the best, most of us, because that's where we grew up. And Paul, even though you didn't grow up in the U.S., you grew up in an American family, right? So there's still a lot of Americanisms there as well. So Nordic. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Nordic European cultures. Europe is huge. We have to divide Europe up into several. So here's the map. And there are 5, okay? Oops. Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, which we sometimes forget exists. It's right there, a little bitty country bordering on Germany. And then Iceland. right? And what's the other one that that is actually the opposite when it comes to climate that we compare with Iceland? Yeah, Iceland is actually green, and Greenland is actually icy. Okay, wasn't Napoleon that purposely got those mixed up to confuse the enemy? He renamed them. Anyway, those are the 5 there that you should remember. Okay. Just take a moment to, especially with the news as it is today, okay, you see that Finland is on the Russian border. Anybody here familiar with the Rucolas? They're missionaries with Baptist missions for like 30 or 40 years to Finland. Anybody, I don't know if they were in your church. Tom and Linda Rucola, really, really neat couple. In fact, they are Finnish. The name Rucola is a Finnish name. And they served right on the border, and they would often go into Russia and try to reach people there as well. But just a really neat couple. All right. How many of you have roots in this part of the world? Again, I think I've asked this before. Your roots come from, well, what's another name for this area of the world? Pardon? Well, Norwegian would be people from Norway specifically, but collectively, we sometimes call this area Scandinavia. And I did a little research on that too, because I want to know where did Scandinavia come from. And apparently, and there seems to be a little bit of uncertainty about this, but apparently the southern part of Sweden was called Scadia, and they added the N later. It was like Scadia or Scadia. And so it kind of picked up the name, and they were Scandins or Scandians or whatever, and it eventually kind of got used in general, the whole region, Scandinavia. So I looked up the etymology of it. Some think it actually refers, it's connected to the word south. It was part of South Sweden, but I didn't get as clear of an answer as I wanted. But it's known as Scandinavia, right? Well, so why are we calling it the Nordic cluster? What does that word mean? What's Nordic mean? State the obvious. North. Right. Can you think of some other words from that region of the world that actually mean north as well? Who lived in the northern part of France and influenced the English language? Who are those guys? Normans. Right. Right. And then you have the Norsemen. It's actually the same, the Normans, Norsemen. So all of those refer to the north. In the Olympics, who always wins the ski competitions? Well, not always, but a lot of times it's the people from up there. So that's the region we're talking about. So the Nordic cluster is the northernmost of all the clusters. Now let me just go back to that map a second here. Actually, if you look, you can see that Russia goes farther north. We're not saying by that there's nothing farther north than them, but as a cluster, they're the ones that are the furthest north as a collective cluster than any other, okay? This region is also known as Scandinavia for reasons we just tried to describe. Scandinavia, okay? B, it includes Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland. You should probably know that. Let's see. I always forget. There's Johnson and there's Johnson. There's Johnson, O-N, and our neighbor, the one, my neighbor Guy died last week, but his last name was Johnson with an E-N, not nearly as common. Does anybody here remember which one is Danish and which one is Swedish or Norwegian? I always get that mixed up. Okay. None of you have S-O-N on the end of your name, right? And that's last name. Well, yours is S-E-N? Yeah, your last name. Oh, E-T. Sorry. I'm mixing up with Gosen. Tricia. No. In this cluster, people dress nicely, but not too fashionably. Bling. Are you guys familiar with the word bling? Do you use that? Yeah. Frankly, it's not a word that I have hardly ever used in my life. But when I started studying this, it came up. What is bling? It's Ethan Hartog walking by. But no, bling is wow. In Brazil, they have this statement, eita, ela é muito cheguei. That literally is, hey, she is really, here I am, I've arrived. Cheguei means I've arrived. So if somebody's really dressed up loud, and whoa, and calling attention, you say, yeah, she's really, I've arrived. Everybody look at me. But in the Nordic culture, that is taboo. The Nordic culture does not like, the idea of people purposely trying to stand out and call attention to themselves. Okay? Now, obviously, I'm on a day like today when we're having Spirit Week or something like that. And they would do that there too. But in general, in the day-to-day life, they don't like the bling. Let's see, who has been to an IKEA store before? Which one? Oh, okay, yeah.
One in Arizona.
Yeah, Phoenix?
Yeah.
We were at that one a couple years ago. It's huge. And they got the arrows there. You got to follow your way through, right? You can turn around, I guess, but yeah. So what strikes you about that furniture?
You can take a nap.
Yeah, you can take a nap, which means it's very, comfortable and practical, right? Yeah, good. What else?
Cozy?
Cozy? I'm sorry, who said that? Cozy? Yeah, it's comfortable. That's important, yeah? Simple. In fact, you might even use the word boxy. And there was a time in our country when this kind of thing would have been considered taboo. People, you see some of the old furniture, with the curly, and the fancy backs. Even things like overstuffed chairs. Nordic culture would shy away from that kind of stuff. The overstuffed couches and all that. The idea is nice, practical, but not bling. Okay? These colors, they don't jump out at you. It's pretty, it's nice, but they're not leaping out at you. Okay? So that is a mark. That's not just IKEA's idea. That is IKEA's reflection of the culture where it comes from. Yeah. Look at these cars. And I'm not a car expert. I mean, I look at that and I say, so what's the difference? No, there's a difference. If you look closely, you got some SUVs here and you got, sedans. But what strikes you? The similarity, even the colors. There's not a whole lot of variation in colors. They're all metallic, but, pretty neutral colors. No yellows, no reds, right? This is Volvo in Sweden. It reflects the non-bling idea of culture, right? Interesting. This is being a tough guy here. Fashion update. Relaxed spring. Relaxed separates in soft colors, right? Make any look seem effortlessly fresh. $29 knit shirt. So notice even the chair he's sitting in. It's simple outdoor, chair. He's wearing jeans. Okay, no bling. Nice, fashionable, but not bling. This is also the most formally developed cluster. What do we mean? Well, there was a Nordic council way back in 1971. I was 11. And it represented the participating nations. The council got together to try to maintain unity among those 5 countries. And in the 11th century, the Norsemen established the Scandinavian Empire, Norsemen. Not to be confused with the Normans, who were in northern France, right? And so these are all guys that got, so in other words, it's an old cluster. 11th century is, 1971 is recent history, but you're still talking 50 years ago, 54 years ago, or no, 52 years ago. So it's formally developed. They do try to cooperate. Very different. We have Canada to the north and Mexico to the south, but we really don't have a lot of interaction with our two neighbors. You know, we kind of want them to do their thing, we'll do our thing. Norsemen were more popularly known as Vikings. Men of the Vik. The Vik is an area, if you look on a map, let me just, between Norway and Sweden, let me see if it shows, oh nuts, did I just do that? Let me just go back here to this map and see if it, between Norway and Sweden, hold on. Yeah, no, it doesn't show up on this map. There's a section between the two of them that was called the Vik, and that's apparently where the name Vikings came from, all right? But you don't need to know that, all right, let me see, let's go back here. Okay, their primary interest actually was not in war. When you think of Vikings, don't you oftentimes think of, you know, warlike, barbaric kind of people, you know, they're bloodthirsty and all that. That really is not a fair designation of the Vikings. Their real interest was in trade. They engaged in war in order to protect and advance their trade. Okay, but the end game really wasn't war and conquering and taking over nations. It was establishing trade. In fact, the British had the same problem. A lot of times, the colonialism a lot of times involved war, but because the British wanted to establish trade and protect those trade interests, and that often involved war. Okay. Physical strength, speed, resilience were big things. They were a very active culture with a love for the outdoors, competition, and sports, especially outdoor sports. Now, does that mean that everybody that likes hunting and fishing is Scandinavian? No. But in states like Minnesota, where there are lots of Scandinavians, you'll find that lots of people like hunting and fishing and outdoor sports. What else, politically speaking, would you expect in a cluster like this? Thinking about the outdoors, that sort of thing, what kind of political activism might you expect to find here? Yeah, conservation, right. That whole idea of going green, right? Yeah, all of that. Environmentalism is a big, and again, it's not just them, that's a stereotypical statement, but in general, the Nordic cluster would be very much, you know, active in that sort of thing, because they love and prize the outdoors, right? The shipping industry was huge. And frankly, a lot of the Viking ships and things, you know, they were very, very good navigating the waters. And if you look at the map, you got a lot of water to navigate, right? Tons of, so, you know, to get around, you had to have ships, so you weren't going to get very far. Anybody here ever hear of Yante law? The J would be like a Y, Yante. Is that familiar to anybody? I'll tell you what. Let me just introduce it, but I've got a couple of video clips I want to play on Wednesday that really talk more about this. Yante law was made popular by a Dane, and Danes would come from where? Denmark. So Denmark, Danes, Nordics are, from Norway you are Norwegian, that was pretty easy. Sweden, Swedish. Iceland? Icelander, yep, just like Michigander, yep. Yep. Finland? Finnish, right. So this guy in the 1930s, he wrote a book, and it was a fiction about this town called Yante. That's where the Yante law idea comes from. He creates this town, and it was a lot like the town he grew up in, which I don't know where that was. So in this town, no one is anonymous. In other words, everybody is important. Now, this is one of the hallmarks of the Yante, of the Nordic cluster. And again, we'll talk more about this on Wednesday. But nobody's to be left out and nobody's to be bling. That everybody is kind of like the cars. There shouldn't be a lot of, nobody's left out, but nobody stands out, if we can put it that way. You're not left out and you don't stand out, okay? But it's time to go, so we'll get into this more next time around. All right, thank you all.